"You don't
You don't
belong in
belong in
first
first
class!"
class!
Rebecca Hanson screamed, her hand striking Elena Rodriguez in the face. A sharp crack echoed throughout the cabin, as if tearing apart the gold-plated atmosphere that was familiar to business class. 50 passengers were dumbfounded, a few phones flashed, and most of them just stared blankly, not having time to breathe. Elena swayed for a beat. The taste of blood spread in her mouth, and her cheeks burned as if she had been burned by fire. But when she looked up, her eyes were frighteningly cold, quiet, not a single tear, not a single cry. There was only a heavy silence, as tense as a rope about to break. No one in the cabin knew that this slap was not the end. It is just the beginning of a storm that is forming, a storm that will engulf it all in an inescapable vortex. 20 minutes earlier, Elena had walked through the boarding gate with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place in the world through decades of struggle and achievement. She wore a simple charcoal cardigan over dark jeans, carried a well-worn leather messenger bag, and moved with the unhurried pace of a frequent traveler. Nothing about her appearance screamed wealth or power, and that was exactly how she preferred it. As CEO of Horizon Pacific Airlines, Elena made this journey from Seattle to Chicago at least twice a month. But today was different. Today, she was heading to the National Aviation Summit, where she was scheduled to deliver the keynote address on diversity and inclusion in modern airlines, a speech that would be broadcast to industry leaders worldwide. Ironically, she had deliberately chosen to fly as a regular passenger, using a ticket purchased under her maiden name, wanting to experience her airline through the eyes of her customers one last time before her public presentation. She had no idea that what she was about to experience would become the most powerful material for her speech and would change everything. Rebecca Hanson noticed her immediately. With 15 years of experience in first class, Rebecca prided herself on recognizing her kind of people, the investment bankers, the tech executives, the entertainment moguls who belonged in the premium cabin. This woman, with her modest clothing and lack of obvious designer accessories, didn't fit the profile. "Excuse me," Rebecca said as Elena settled into seat 2A, her tone already carrying an edge that other passengers had never heard directed at them. "I need to see your boarding pass." Elena looked up with a polite smile, reaching into her bag. "Of course." She handed over the document, watching Rebecca's face carefully as the flight attendant examined it with unnecessary scrutiny. "This says Elena Martinez," Rebecca said, her eyes narrowing. "Is this you?" "Martinez is my maiden name," Elena replied calmly. "I sometimes use it for personal travel." Rebecca's lips pursed. In her experience, people who used different names were usually up to something. She glanced around the cabin, noting how the other first-class passengers, all white, all clearly affluent, looked entirely at home in their premium seats. This woman, this Elena Martinez, stood out like a discordant note in an otherwise harmonious composition. "I'll need to see additional identification," Rebecca announced, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Several heads turned, watching with curiosity as this unusual scene unfolded. Elena's eyebrows rose slightly, but she complied, producing her driver's license. Rebecca studied it far longer than necessary, comparing the photo to Elena's face as if she were a bouncer checking a fake ID at a nightclub. "Everything appears to be in order," Rebecca finally said, though her tone suggested disappointment. She moved away, but not far, continuing to watch Elena with suspicious eyes. In seat 1B, Thomas Bennett leaned toward his wife, Catherine. "I wonder how she afforded a first-class ticket," he whispered, not bothering to lower his voice much. "Probably used points or got some kind of employee discount." Catherine nodded knowingly. "You can always tell when someone doesn't really belong in first class. They don't carry themselves the right way." Elena heard every word. She also noticed how Rebecca offered champagne and warm nuts to every other passenger while somehow forgetting to serve her. She observed the way conversations quieted when she passed by on her way to the lavatory and how eyes followed her with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. For 25 years, Elena had been building Horizon Pacific Airlines from a small regional carrier into one of America's major airlines. She had endured countless boardroom battles, navigated economic downturns, and fought tooth and nail for every route, every aircraft, every dollar of revenue. But sitting in her own first-class cabin, she felt like an unwelcome intruder in a space she had created. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Rebecca's suspicions crystallized into something more dangerous. She had called over her colleague, Linda Parker, and the two women now stood at Elena's row, their body language unmistakably hostile. "Ma'am, we need to verify the authenticity of your ticket," Rebecca announced, her voice carrying across the cabin. Other passengers looked up from their phones and magazines, sensing drama. Elena set down her laptop and looked up calmly. "I'm sorry. What exactly needs to be verified? You've already checked my boarding pass and identification." "There have been issues recently with fraudulent tickets," Linda chimed in, though no such issues existed. "We need to call ground services to confirm your reservation." "That seems unnecessary," Elena said evenly. "Is this standard procedure for all passengers?" Rebecca's face flushed. "It's standard procedure when we have reasonable suspicion that something isn't right." The words hung in the air like smoke. Reasonable suspicion. Elena felt the familiar knot in her stomach that she'd experienced countless times before. In luxury stores where she was followed by security. In restaurants where she was seated near the kitchen despite reservations. In business meetings where she was mistaken for an assistant rather than the CEO. And what, specifically, has aroused this reasonable suspicion? Elena asked, her voice remaining level despite the anger building inside her. Rebecca exchanged a look with Linda. "You just don't seem like our typical first-class passenger." The euphemism was paper-thin. Everyone in the cabin understood exactly what she meant. Elena pulled out her phone and began typing, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. To the flight attendants, it looked like she was texting nervously. In reality, she was documenting everything. The time, the names visible on the crew's badges, the seat numbers of passengers who were watching and recording. A small voice in the back of her mind noted the bitter irony. In less than 8 hours, she was supposed to stand on stage and talk about creating inclusive airline experiences. Now she was living proof of why that conversation was desperately needed. She also sent a quick message to her chief counsel. "Need legal team on standby. Significant discrimination incident occurring on FL 3492. Will need full investigation and response plan. May need to delay summit keynote." "Ma'am, please put your phone away," Rebecca snapped. "You're disrupting the safety demonstration." Elena looked around the cabin. Half the passengers had their phones out, some openly recording the confrontation. None of them had been asked to put their devices away. "I see other passengers using their phones," Elena observed. "Those passengers aren't causing problems," Linda retorted. The accusation was absurd. Elena had done nothing but sit quietly in her assigned seat, respond politely to questions, and comply with every request. But she was being labeled as a problem passenger for the simple act of existing while black in first class. Captain Daniel Lee, making his pre-flight rounds, paused at the disturbance. "Is everything all right here?" Rebecca immediately shifted into victim mode. "This passenger is being uncooperative with our security procedures. She's refused to properly verify her ticket." Elena looked up at the captain. "I've provided my boarding pass and ID, which matched perfectly. I'm simply asking why I'm being subjected to additional screening that isn't being applied to other passengers." Captain Lee glanced around the cabin, noting the obvious tension and the phones pointed in their direction. "Let me see the documentation," he said quietly. Rebecca handed over Elena's boarding pass and driver's license. Lee examined them briefly and frowned. These look completely legitimate to me. What's the issue? We're just being thorough, Rebecca insisted, but her confidence was wavering. Perhaps we should contact ground services for a final verification, Linda suggested, doubling down on their position. Elena's phone buzzed with a response from her legal team. Standing by. Document everything. We're monitoring Flight 3492's departure. Signal if you need immediate intervention. She looked up at the captain and spoke clearly enough for the recording phones to capture every word. I want it noted that I'm being subjected to additional security measures not applied to other passengers, and I believe this treatment is based on my race. I'm complying under protest. The word race sent a ripple through the cabin. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward with interest. The social media live streams that had started as entertainment were now capturing what looked like a civil rights incident at 30,000 feet. Airport manager David Sullivan arrived at the gate just as the plane was about to push back. Rebecca's call to ground services had escalated quickly through the chain of command, and Sullivan prided himself on handling situations before they became problems for the airline. He boarded the aircraft with 2 security officers, his expression stern and uncompromising. Sullivan had been in airport management for 12 years, and he'd learned that showing weakness in these kinds of confrontations only encouraged further disruption. "Where's the problem, passenger?" he asked Rebecca loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Row 2, Seat A," Rebecca replied, pointing at Elena like she was identifying a criminal in a lineup. Sullivan approached Elena's seat with the security officers flanking him. "Ma'am, you need to come with us to resolve this ticket issue." Elena looked up calmly. "What ticket issue? My boarding pass and identification have been verified multiple times." "There are questions about the authenticity of your documents," Sullivan stated, though he had no evidence to support this claim. "You need to deplane for additional screening." "I'm not deplaning," Elena said firmly. "I've done nothing wrong, and I've complied with every reasonable request. If you believe there's an issue with my ticket, you can verify it electronically while I remain in my seat." Sullivan's jaw tightened. In his experience, people who challenged authority usually had something to hide. "Ma'am, you can either come voluntarily, or these officers will escort you." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Elena felt the eyes of 50 passengers boring into her, their phones capturing every moment of her humiliation. She thought of her grandmother, who had been denied service at lunch counters in the 1960s, and her mother, who had been the first black student to integrate her high school in Texas. "I understand you believe you're just doing your job," Elena said, her voice carrying across the silent cabin. "But what you're doing right now is illegal discrimination, and it's being recorded by dozens of people." "You don't get to lecture me about the law," Sullivan snapped. "Security, escort her off the plane." That's when Rebecca Hansen lost what remained of her professional composure. "You know what?" she shouted, stepping directly in front of Elena. "I'm sick of people like you thinking you can just waltz into first class like you own the place." The slap came without warning, a vicious crack that echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Elena's head snapped to the side, her cheek immediately reddening from the impact. For a moment, the entire plane seemed to stop breathing. "You think your fake ticket and your attitude give you the right to disrespect us?" Rebecca continued, her voice rising to a shriek. "This is for paying customers, not for people gaming the system." Elena slowly turned back to face her attacker, her hand touching her stinging cheek. Blood trickled from a small cut where Rebecca's ring had caught her skin. "Did you just assault me?" Elena asked quietly, her voice deadly calm. Sullivan realized the situation had spiraled completely out of control. "Everyone calm down," he said, but his authority had evaporated the moment Rebecca raised her hand. Around the cabin, passengers were on their feet, some shouting in outrage, others cheering Rebecca's actions. Thomas Bennett pumped his fist. Finally, someone with the guts to put these people in their place. But others were horrified. That was completely uncalled for, shouted Dr. Jennifer Chen, an Asian-American physician in seat 3C. You can't just hit people. She had it coming, Catherine Bennett replied coldly. Maybe now she'll learn some respect. Elena pulled out her phone again, her movements deliberate and calm despite the chaos around her. Through the haze of pain and humiliation, a dark thought crossed her mind. Her keynote speech about discrimination in airlines was scheduled to begin in 8 hours. She had planned to present statistics, case studies, theoretical solutions. Now she had something far more powerful, a real-time case study that she had lived through. The irony was almost unbearable. She called a number that would have shocked everyone in the cabin if they'd known whose direct line she was dialing. "This is Elena Rodriguez," she said into the phone, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. "I need immediate legal response to Flight 3492. I've been physically assaulted by a crew member in front of witnesses." Sullivan grabbed for her phone. "You're not making any calls until this is resolved." Elena pulled her device away. "Don't touch me. I have a right to contact my attorney after being assaulted." "Your attorney?" Rebecca laughed harshly. "What attorney? You probably got that number from a bus stop ad." Elena's eyes met Rebecca's, and for the first time, something dangerous flickered in her gaze. "You have no idea who you just hit, do you?" "I know exactly what I hit," Rebecca sneered. "A scammer who thinks she can intimidate her way into first class." Elena stood up slowly, her full height and presence suddenly filling the space around her seat. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that cut through all the noise and chaos. "My name is Elena Rodriguez. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Pacific Airlines. This is my airline, this is my plane, and you just made the biggest mistake of your career." The words hung in the air for exactly 3 seconds before the cabin exploded into chaos. Rebecca's face went white as a sheet. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. Sullivan immediately pulled out his phone, frantically searching for something to disprove what he'd just heard. But even as he typed Elena Rodriguez, Horizon Pacific Airlines CEO into his browser, the sinking feeling in his stomach told him he was about to find exactly what he feared. "She's lying!" Thomas Bennett shouted from his seat. "There's no way she's a CEO! Look at her!" But other passengers were already Googling, their faces shifting from skepticism to shock as Elena's photo appeared on their screens. The same face, the same woman who was now standing in the aisle with blood on her cheek from where a flight attendant had struck her. Dr. Chen held up her phone, showing Elena's LinkedIn profile to nearby passengers. "Oh my God, she's telling the truth. Elena Rodriguez, CEO of Horizon Pacific Airlines since 2018. The revelation hit the cabin like a tsunami. Those who had been recording for entertainment suddenly realized they were documenting what might be the biggest corporate scandal of the year. The hashtag CEO assaulted began trending on Twitter within minutes. Rebecca sank into a nearby seat, her legs no longer able to support her. "I didn't know," she whispered. "How was I supposed to know?" Elena's response was ice cold. "You weren't supposed to know my position to treat me with basic human dignity. You were supposed to treat me with respect because I'm a paying customer and a human being." Sullivan was now frantically on his phone with corporate headquarters, his voice rising with panic. "Yes, sir, I understand this is a problem. No, sir, I didn't know who she was. Yes, sir, she was physically assaulted by our crew." The security officers who had been prepared to remove Elena were now standing awkwardly, unsure of their role in what had become a complete role reversal. Their boss was demanding they arrest the CEO of the airline, a woman who probably had more authority over their jobs than anyone else in the building. Captain Lee, who had been in the cockpit during the assault, returned to find his cabin in complete upheaval. When Sullivan briefed him on what had happened, the pilot's face went ashen. You let a flight attendant strike the CEO? Lee whispered. Are you out of your mind? Meanwhile, the social media explosion was gaining momentum. The Horizon scandal and Daesh airline racism were trending nationally. News outlets were picking up the story from passenger live streams. The stock market began reacting, with Horizon Pacific's shares dropping 3% in after-hours trading as the news spread. Elena remained calm in the center of the storm, methodically documenting everything on her phone. She photographed her injured cheek, recorded video statements from sympathetic passengers, and made notes about every person who had participated in or witnessed the incident. Ma'am, Captain Lee approached her carefully. I want to personally apologize for what happened. This is completely unacceptable. Captain Lee, Elena replied, checking his name tag. I appreciate your concern, but apologies don't fix systemic problems. What happened here today isn't an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a culture that needs to change. Rebecca, still slumped in her seat, looked up with desperate eyes. Please, Miss Rodriguez, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I've never done anything like this before. Elena turned to face her attacker. Haven't you? Have you never looked at a black passenger and assumed they didn't belong in first class? Have you never provided slower service to customers who didn't look like your idea of wealth? This didn't start when you hit me. It started the moment you decided I didn't deserve the same treatment as other passengers. The truth of Elena's words resonated through the cabin. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing their own biases in her description. Dr. Chen stood up. Ms. Rodriguez, I witnessed everything. I'm a physician, and I can document your injuries. I also recorded most of the incident on my phone. Thank you, Dr. Chen, Elena replied. I'll need you to provide a written statement. Thomas Bennett, who had been loudly supporting Rebecca's actions, was now furiously deleting the videos he'd posted to social media, but it was too late. They'd already been screenshot and shared thousands of times. Sullivan received another call from corporate, and his face went even paler. Yes, sir. She's still on the plane. No, sir, we haven't taken off. Yes, sir. I understand the board has been notified. He approached Elena with trembling hands. Ms. Rodriguez, I've been instructed to inform you that Horizon Pacific's board of directors is convening an emergency meeting. They want to speak with you immediately. Elena checked her watch. Tell them I'll speak with them when I'm ready. Right now I'm collecting evidence and ensuring this incident is properly documented. The power dynamic had completely flipped. Sullivan, who had boarded the plane as the authority figure ready to remove a problem passenger, was now taking orders from the woman he'd tried to have arrested. Rebecca made one last, desperate attempt. Ms. Rodriguez, please. I have 3 children. I can't lose my job. I made a terrible mistake, but I can change. I can learn. Elena looked at her for a long moment. Rebecca, your children deserve a mother who treats all people with dignity and respect. Maybe losing this job will help you become that person. The finality in her voice made it clear that Rebecca's career with Horizon Pacific Airlines was over. At exactly 8:47 p.m., Elena's phone rang with a call that would change everything. Elena, this is Marcus Sterling, the voice said, and everyone close enough to hear recognized the name of Horizon Pacific's board chairman. I've just been briefed on the situation. Are you injured? Elena put the call on speaker, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent cabin. I have a laceration on my cheek from where your flight attendant struck me with her ring. But I'm more concerned about the systemic issues this incident has revealed. We're taking this very seriously, Sterling continued. The entire board is convening tonight. We want you to know that we support you completely and will take whatever action is necessary. Sullivan, realizing his career was likely over, made a final desperate play. Mr. Sterling, there may have been misunderstandings on both sides. Mr. Sullivan, Sterling's voice cut through the phone like a blade. Are you suggesting that our CEO bears responsibility for being assaulted by our employee? The question hung in the air, and Sullivan realized that any answer would only dig his grave deeper. Elena took control. Marcus, I want a complete investigation not just of this incident, but of our training procedures, our hiring practices, and our culture. This didn't happen in a vacuum. Absolutely, Sterling agreed. What do you need from us right now? I need the crew responsible for this incident removed from duty immediately. I need passenger statements collected and preserved. And I need our crisis management team activated. This story is already going viral. As if summoned by her words, Sullivan's phone began ringing with calls from news outlets. CNN, NBC, ABC, and Fox News had all gotten wind of the story from social media and were demanding statements. Elena addressed the cabin directly. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank those of you who spoke up against injustice tonight. Dr. Chen, Mr. Park, Mrs. Lopez, your voices mattered. For those who cheered when I was assaulted, I want you to think about what that says about your character. She turned to Rebecca, who was now crying quietly. Rebecca, you're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you off this plane and you'll receive formal termination paperwork within 48 hours. Rebecca's sobs grew louder, but Elena wasn't finished. Mr. Sullivan, you're also terminated. Your failure to de-escalate this situation, your willingness to participate in discriminatory treatment, and your complete lack of judgment have made your position untenable. Sullivan started to protest, but Elena cut him off. The security officers who were prepared to arrest me based on no evidence will be suspended pending investigation. Captain Lee, you'll need to file a complete incident report with the FAA. The speed and decisiveness of Elena's actions left everyone stunned. This wasn't just corporate damage control. This was systematic justice being administered in real time. Furthermore, Elena continued, Horizon Pacific Airlines will be implementing immediate changes. Every employee will undergo mandatory bias training. We'll be establishing an anonymous reporting system for discrimination incidents, and we'll be partnering with civil rights organizations to audit our practices. Dr. Chen began clapping, and soon other passengers joined in. The applause wasn't just for Elena's response, it was for seeing justice delivered swiftly and completely. Thomas Bennett, realizing his own videos were being used as evidence against the airline, tried to slink away unnoticed. But Elena's attention turned to him. Mr. Bennett, your celebration of violence against a black woman has been recorded and shared thousands of times. While I can't control how your employer responds to seeing those videos, I can tell you that you're banned from flying Horizon Pacific Airlines. Bennett's face went red. You can't do that. I'm a platinum member. Not anymore, Elena replied calmly. Security will escort you off the plane as well. The systematic dismantling of everyone who had participated in her humiliation was swift and thorough. Elena wasn't just responding to an incident, she was demonstrating that actions have consequences, and that power, when properly wielded, can be a force for justice. As news crews gathered outside the terminal, Elena received a text from her communications director. Ma'am, we have 47 interview requests and climbing. How do you want to handle media response? Elena typed back, schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. Tonight, we take care of our people and our principles. The story will wait. The consequences began falling like dominoes before the plane even returned to the gate. Rebecca Hansen was escorted off the aircraft by security, her career with Horizon Pacific Airlines ending in humiliation as passengers recorded her removal. Her tearful protests about not knowing Elena's identity fell on deaf ears. The assault had been captured on dozens of phones, and no amount of remorse could undo what she'd done. Within hours, Rebecca's name was trending on social media alongside the hashtags Airline Assault and Thakar Karma is Real. The video of her striking Elena had been viewed over 2 million times, and her personal information, including her Facebook page filled with questionable political posts, had been discovered and shared by internet activists. By morning, Rebecca received a certified letter formally terminating her employment for cause, which meant no severance package, no benefits continuation, and a permanent mark on her record that would make finding another job in the airline industry nearly impossible. David Sullivan faced an even swifter downfall. As airport manager, he was held to a higher standard of judgment and leadership. His decision to support an employee's assault on a passenger, CEO or not, was grounds for immediate termination. The airport authority released a statement distancing themselves from his actions and announcing his dismissal within 18 hours of the incident. Sullivan's LinkedIn profile, which had proudly displayed his 12 years of experience in airport management, was quietly deleted as he realized his career in the industry was effectively over. The Federal Aviation Administration launched an investigation into his conduct, which could result in fines and permanent prohibition from working in airline security. The security officers who had been prepared to arrest Elena without evidence faced suspension and mandatory retraining. Their body cameras had captured their willingness to detain a passenger based solely on a flight attendant's accusations, raising questions about their training and judgment. Thomas Bennett's downfall was perhaps the most public. The videos he had posted celebrating Elena's assault were screen captured before he could delete them and widely circulated. His employer, a respected financial firm, issued a statement condemning his behavior and announcing his immediate termination. His professional reputation, built over 20 years, was destroyed in less than 24 hours. His wife, Catherine, whose own recorded comments about Elena knowing her place went viral, faced social media backlash that led to her resignation from the charity board she had chaired for 5 years. But the consequences extended far beyond individual punishments. Horizon Pacific Airlines faced immediate scrutiny from federal regulators. The Department of Transportation announced an investigation into the airline's training practices and complaint procedures. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission opened its own inquiry into potential discrimination patterns. The airline's stock price plummeted 8% in the first day of trading after the incident, wiping out nearly $400 million in market value. Major corporate clients began reviewing their travel contracts, and several threatened to cancel partnerships unless Horizon Pacific could demonstrate meaningful changes. The video footage from the incident became evidence in multiple investigations. The FBI opened a civil rights investigation, examining whether Elena's treatment constituted a federal hate crime. State prosecutors in Washington announced they were reviewing the assault charges against Rebecca Hansen. The incident also triggered a broader industry reckoning. Other airlines rushed to review their own training procedures and discrimination policies, fearing they might be harboring similar cultural problems. The Association of Flight Attendants issued a statement condemning Rebecca's actions and announcing mandatory bias training for all members. For Elena personally, the assault became a catalyst for change she had been planning for years. The incident gave her the momentum and public support to implement sweeping reforms that might have taken years to gain approval under normal circumstances. She announced a $10 million fund for diversity and inclusion training across the airline industry. She partnered with civil rights organizations to develop new standards for passenger treatment. She implemented a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination that applied to employees and passengers alike. Most importantly, she used her platform to address the systemic issues that made the incident possible. In interviews with major news outlets, she spoke about the everyday discrimination faced by Black travelers, the assumptions made about who belongs in premium spaces, and the need for cultural change throughout the industry. The message was clear: actions have consequences. Justice can be swift when power is properly exercised, and change is possible when leaders are willing to use their authority to protect the vulnerable rather than enable the privileged. A week after the incident, Elena sat across from Anderson Cooper in CNN's New York studio, the small bandage on her cheek serving as a visible reminder of what had happened aboard Flight 3492. Her composure was complete, her voice steady as she spoke not with anger, but with the measured tone of someone who had transformed personal pain into systemic change. Anderson, what happened to me wasn't really about me, she began, her hands folded calmly in her lap. It was about every black traveler who has been made to feel unwelcome in spaces they paid to access. It was about every person who has been judged by their appearance rather than their character or their ticket. Cooper leaned forward. You've mentioned that you deliberately didn't reveal your identity initially. Can you explain that decision? Elena nodded thoughtfully. I wanted to experience what our regular customers experience. Too often, executives are insulated from the reality of their own companies. I needed to see Horizon Pacific Airlines through the eyes of someone without power, without protection, without privilege. And what you found was disturbing. What I found was a culture that had allowed bias to masquerade as professionalism, Elena replied. Rebecca Hansen didn't wake up that morning planning to assault someone. But she had been conditioned to see certain people as inherently suspicious, inherently less deserving of respect and service. When Cooper asked about the timing of the incident, Elena's answer revealed an additional layer of irony. Anderson, in less than 8 hours from when I was assaulted on that plane, I was supposed to stand in front of 2,000 aviation industry leaders at the National Aviation Summit and deliver a keynote speech about diversity and inclusion in airlines. I had prepared slides, statistics, best practices from other companies. It was going to be a professional, measured presentation. She paused, her expression shifting between pain and determination. Instead, I walked onto that stage with a visible injury on my face, threw away my prepared remarks, and told them exactly what had just happened to me. I showed them the videos that passengers had recorded. I made them watch their colleague, their peer in this industry, assault a paying customer because of the color of her skin. Cooper leaned forward. How did the industry leaders react? Some were horrified, some were defensive. Some tried to dismiss it as an isolated incident. But by the end of that speech, with my face still bruised and the evidence undeniable, they couldn't look away from the truth anymore. That's when real change became possible. Elena announced the establishment of the Horizon Equality Initiative, a $50 million program that would extend far beyond her own airline. The initiative would provide grants to organizations fighting discrimination in transportation, fund research into bias in customer service, and create scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing careers in aviation. Change doesn't happen through punishment alone, she said. It happens when we create new systems, new training, new ways of thinking about our responsibility to each other. The interview concluded with Elena addressing viewers directly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. To anyone who has experienced discrimination, I want you to know that your dignity matters, your voice matters, and there are people in positions of power who will stand with you when you speak up. To those who might recognize themselves in the people who mistreated me, I want you to know that change is possible. The first step is acknowledging that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of whether they look like what you expect or fit your assumptions about who belongs where. The response to the interview was overwhelming. Horizon Pacific's customer service scores improved dramatically as the company's commitment to equality became a competitive advantage. Other airlines began implementing similar programs, and the incident became a case study in business schools about crisis management and corporate responsibility. But perhaps most importantly, Elena had used her platform to start conversations that extended far beyond the airline industry. She had shown that individual acts of courage, combined with systemic change, could create lasting impact. 6 months later, Elena stood before a packed auditorium at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, delivering the keynote address at their annual summit. The scar on her cheek had faded but remained visible, a reminder she chose not to conceal. When Rebecca Hansen struck me on that plane, she began, her voice carrying easily through the silent hall, she thought she was putting me in my place. What she actually did was reveal the choice we all face every single day. Elena paused, her eyes sweeping across the diverse audience of activists, business leaders, students, and ordinary citizens who had come to hear her speak. Every time you witness injustice, you choose. Every time you see someone being treated unfairly because of their race, their gender, their religion, their appearance, you choose. You can be a bystander, or you can be an ally. You can remain silent, or you can speak up. You can preserve the status quo, or you can demand change. The audience was completely still, hanging on every word. I was fortunate that day. I had power, resources, and a platform that allowed me to fight back immediately. But most people who experience discrimination don't have those advantages. They depend on the courage of others, on people like Dr. Chen, who witnessed what happened and refused to stay silent, on people like you. Elena's voice grew stronger, more urgent. The real question isn't whether discrimination exists. We all know it does. The real question is what you're going to do about it. When you see someone being profiled in a store, will you speak up? When you hear discriminatory language in your workplace, will you report it? When you witness injustice on a plane, in a restaurant, in your community, will you use your voice? She gestured to the audience, her passion evident. Change doesn't happen in boardrooms or courtrooms alone. It happens when ordinary people make extraordinary choices. It happens when enough of us decide that dignity isn't negotiable, that respect isn't earned by the color of your skin or the size of your bank account. The final moments of her speech became a rallying cry. So I'm asking you to make a choice. When you leave here today, commit to being the person who stands up. Be the passenger who says, "This isn't right," when someone is being mistreated. Be the employee who reports discrimination instead of ignoring it. Be the customer who refuses to do business with companies that don't respect all people. Elena's voice rang out clear and strong. Because here's what Rebecca Hansen and David Sullivan and Thomas Bennett never understood. Dignity isn't first class or economy. Respect isn't business or coach. Justice isn't about what seat you can afford. It's about recognizing that every human being deserves to be treated with basic decency. She smiled, and for the first time in her speech, there was a hint of mischief in her voice. And the next time someone tries to tell you that you don't belong somewhere you have every right to be, remind them of this story. Remind them that assumptions are dangerous, that power can shift in an instant, and that treating people with dignity isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. The audience erupted in applause as Elena delivered her final words. Because you never know who owns the plane. Her message had become more than just a story of personal vindication. It had become a movement, a reminder that change is possible when people refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Fly with dignity, stand with courage, because respect has no class boundaries.